Welcome to Monday's devotions as we continue our studies in the book of Romans. We'll be reading today from Romans chapter 1 from verse 18. We'll not be reading the whole section of what we'll be considering today, so I would encourage you in your own time to read through that. I think also in these studies of Romans you'll find it helpful if you had an open Bible before you as I will go through these different sections. So, as we continue this wonderful book of the Apostle Paul, let's read from verse 18 of Romans chapter 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honour him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonouring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. I've entitled this section, the study today, The Wrath of God Revealed. And Paul begins here in this, from verse 18 of chapter 1 right through to chapter 3 verse 20, to explain why salvation in Jesus Christ is necessary. The book of Romans, you remember, is all about the gospel, the good news of how people are saved in Jesus. And this section, Paul is beginning to explain something of why we need to be saved. A number of years ago, a group of students at a British university copied this section from Romans 1 verse 18 right through to Romans 3 verse 20. They put it into a pamphlet form and began to distribute it. They didn't say that it came from the Bible or where it came from, but they shared it around the university. And it caused an absolute uproar. They ended up in trouble. They ended up being brought in front of the university authorities to explain what they were doing. And they were so cross at them that they asked that the person responsible for writing this pamphlet, that they would appear before them also. Shows the ignorance of the authorities, they didn't know the book of Romans, and also shows the hostility to God's truth, particularly about this subject of wrath. God's wrath is never a popular subject. God's wrath is indeed God's settled indignation and opposition against all sin and wickedness. And so we're looking here at God's wrath being revealed. So first of all, why is God's wrath being revealed? Well, there in verse 18 we're told it's against all ungodliness and unrighteousness. Ungodliness is a life in which the true God has been shut out of people's lives and not given the proper place. Ungodliness is a life without the true God. Unrighteousness is a life that comes from it, a life failing to be lived according to God's standards, according to God's commands. And so Paul is saying God's wrath is coming because of the ungodliness, the unrighteousness, those lives which people have gone their own way and shut the true God out of their lives. He says there in verse 18 that their unrighteousness has suppressed the truth, that they are pushing down, they're shutting out the truth of God from their lives. Now he goes on in verses 19 and 20 to speak of how the truth of God can be clearly seen even from the world around us, from creation. The God who made this world, his great qualities, his knowledge, his wisdom, his power can be seen from creation. Looking at the world around us, think what an amazing God it is who has made everything. He is a God of such wonder and such glory. And so Paul teaches here people are without excuse. It can be seen from the world around us as a great God to be worshipped and obeyed. Well, he goes on, verse 21 to 23, to show how people have rejected the truth about God and have moved instead to idolatry. They've made a God in their own image, as they want God to be like the true God. Is too uncomfortable for them, and so they go and they make a God that suits them and follows their own notions. He says there in such words as their thinking has become futile, their foolish hearts have become darkened, they claim to be wise, but they have become fools. And so a person who hasn't the true God in the right place in their lives, a person who doesn't have the true God to govern their thinking, has become a fool. They claim to be wonderful, they claim to be great, but indeed they're far from it. Peter Hitchens, in a debate about Christianity versus atheism and the existence of God, he says one of the most important things to ask is indeed why people are atheists, why people take the decision not to believe in God. And he's very clear it is a decision. And he says that it comes back often to the reality that indeed people do not like the true God. People do not want to obey the true God. They do want to accept, therefore, that he is there. And so they push down, they suppress the truth Paul is teaching here. So God's wrath, why is it being released? It's being released because of ungodliness, shutting God out, unrighteousness, ungodly living, and indeed suppressing the truth about God. And then he moves on in verses 24 to 32 to think about how God's wrath is being revealed. And this might catch you by surprise. He uses a similar phrase at the beginning of verse 24 and verse 26 and verse 28. God gave them over, or God gave them up. And basically, how God's wrath is being revealed, Paul is teaching, is people want to go their own way, and God, as a punishment to them, says, okay, go your own way. Go your own way into a sinful life. Do your own thing. And God says, I'm going to give you enough rope to do that, so that indeed you will be judged because of that. And so God is punishing people by allowing them to go their own way, allowing them to do their own thing. He speaks in verse 24 and verse 25 about God giving them up to the lusts of their hearts, their own desires. Their hearts have been twisted by sin, and God, they don't want God to rule over them. So God says, okay, go into your life of sin. In verse 26 and 27, he speaks clearly about homosexuality as his judgment. Now, that will not be popular today, but this is God's truth. God is saying to him, go your own way. Go and follow your lust. This is my judgment on you. I'm going to let you bring misery on yourself by going your own way into homosexuality. Homosexuality comes from the sin that's people's hearts. Jesus in Matthew 15 and 19 speaks of how all sin, including sexual immorality, comes from the sinful heart of people. And why do you have desires which are homosexual? It comes from a sinful heart. And God is saying, you don't want me, you don't want my standards, you don't want to worship me and follow me. Well, go your own way and bear the consequences for that. But there's no room, for any of us to be arrogant here. In verse 28 to 32, he gives another one of these God gave them up expressions. And then he speaks of how these people, their minds or thinking were filled in verse 29. And there's none of us, indeed, can avoid the finger being pointed. In Romans chapters 1 to 3, in many ways, is a court case. And that God is saying, listen, you're all guilty. You can't just point the finger at homosexuals. You're all guilty. Because we all have things. He says, all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness. We all covet, do we? Malice, envy, murder. Remember, Jesus says murder in the heart is a hatred of people. Strife, deceit, maliciousness, gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. And none of us, indeed, can be proud here. One of the great dangers is pride, and it's a great weapon used by the devil. We all need to understand that we're sinners, undeserving sinners, deserving only of God's wrath before Him. We all need to be humbled by this. We all need to see ourselves as lowly, fallen sinners. And even those of us who come to experience the salvation of Christ, we need to understand the bowl from which we've been baked. We need to understand that we are by nature, we were born by nature sinful people. And there's no room for pride. I've seen that one of the ways the devil has destroyed churches and destroyed the usefulness of Christians is by Christians being full of themselves. Christians thinking they're more spiritual, they're wiser, they're better than their minister and others in their churches. They have failed to understand the truth here. They failed to understand their own sin and their own fallenness. And there's no place for pride here. And you look at verse 32, Paul says, although they knew God's righteous decree and those who practice this thing deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. And people in their hearts, they know that this sin will bring judgment, but they approve of it, they still do it. They're so foolish. And I wonder, is that you? Are you someone who's still bound by your sin? Still locked in your sin instead of coming to Jesus for forgiveness and to be set free from the power of sin over you? Remember what Rock of Ages says about Jesus? Be of sin the double cure. Cleanse me of its guilt and power. Look to Jesus. God bless.